All right, Jessica, you're here, and we're going to talk about psychedelics for sure. How you doing today?
I'm good. It was a long day here, but also feeling like it was a good slow day for me today.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's
How
good.
about you?
Busy. My life is incredibly busy right now. Between work and selling our home to move, so
Ooh,
a lot
yeah.
happening right now. For
Yeah. And moving can be so stressful. I'm also in the search for a new apartment here, so
you know how it goes. Moving is it's a lot of work and it's a lot of change in your life.
yeah. How does that feel?
You know, it actually feels good. I grew up in a military family, so I'm
Hmm.
used to moving and I've moved a lot as an adult. So I'm used to it, but it still can be a little bit tough for
Yeah.
that, just the process of it. But I'm super pumped about it, excited. So,
Y-
yeah.
Yeah. There's always like the new beginnings part is always exciting.
Yeah, yeah. It's something to look forward to. Sometimes in life you get in kind of the wheel. I call it the wheel. You just keep going
Mhm.
and the repeat days, every day feels the same. So it's nice to have to shake it up a little bit.
A little bit, yeah, out of the comfort zone and then, yeah, trying to sort things out in a different way. Yeah.
Well, speaking of sorting things out, especially, this is a very true statement about what we're going to talk about today. But I wanted
Mhm.
to let's backtrack about your experience or how did you come to the psychedelic world?
Ooh, yeah. Okay. It's a long story, but I will try to keep it short. Basically, psychedelics were introduced into my life about 6 years ago when I first moved from Brazil to Amsterdam. And I initially used them in a very sort of like a more recreational setting. And it took me like about a year or so to actually find out that they actually had other benefits than just fun.
Oh, so you mean
And
recreational? Like, tell me what that mean. I know fun, but let's dive deeper. What does that mean to you at that time?
oh, yeah. So different from many people in this space, I'm actually a very big advocate for recreational use of psychedelic drugs. I think for me personally, and for a lot of people in my circle, these have been really incredible tools for self-expression, for connection with each other, or getting to know yourself better, even if you are, taking those with your friends or in a music festival. Um, I really saw how it did for me. It really contributed much more with feeling more confident on my expression and how I show up in those spaces, how I show up in conversations with other people, and what are, the areas in my life that I am more connected and the ones that I'm, like not being in full alignment with myself. So I feel like even if people kind of bump into these drugs in a recreational way, they will eventually find out there are the benefits because it's also difficult uh, to see someone who have had recreational experience with psychedelics and have not learned something about themselves, especially also like the things that we don't want to look at so much, they will often show up in one way or another, especially if you're taking the substances in settings that you cannot control so much of what is happening around you. Then you will be confronted with certain trips that will show, certain aspects of yourself that you need to look a little bit deeper into. So, yeah, for me, yeah, recreational use um, was and is a big part of my life, and I think is just as legit as any um, other sort of use, like what people say for healing purposes and all of
Yeah.
that. And I don't think that necessarily means we are disrespecting the traditional use of these substances, because you can also use those in a recreational way for the reasons I just described to you, intentionally, and you're not necessarily disrespecting the lineage, of traditions that these compounds have, but more giving reference to it in a different way.
Is there a controversy in the space about recreational use versus, let's say, use for treating like PTSD or depression? Is there some type of friction in that?
Well, yeah, like what I see is, yeah, ideally we would like to see something different, right? But in the psychedelic space, there's a lot of friction in different areas of like how people think the substances should and should not be used. So if you pick those who work in the clinical setting, in psychotherapy and all of that, many think that this is the only way that psychedelics should be used. And of course, like I'm talking here from my own personal beliefs and opinions.
Of course.
So yeah, everybody thinks about that in a different way. And I understand the reasons why there's a certain preference and caution regarding, just using these compounds in a clinical setting. But yeah, I also think like there's a certain stigmatization regarding recreational use, and like you say people using drugs for self-exploration or just for pleasure or just for fun. For many, this sounds like something wrong, like you shouldn't be doing that, especially when you pick women doing drugs for fun. There's another layer of stigma that comes on top of that. And yeah, I think for me, that's also an interesting aspect to explore, is because we can look into all the pressure and the beliefs that society has of like how certain things should be done or not, and when like kind of categorizing them like, oh, this is better than the other way. But as we see like in the psychedelic space, is I don't think it's necessarily like that. And we even have that as an example, the traditional use by indigenous people, which in many ways they have much more knowledge than the science has right now. But Western medicine does not take that so much into consideration. Even still, like there is a big gap nowadays in trying to bridge, modern traditions and Western science in how to approach psychedelic healing. So I think what we actually need is really that people are more open to listen to the different ways that people can work with these tools, and not necessarily come, already with such judgmental and perspectives and thinking like, oh yeah, my way is better than your way, and all the other ways are wrong. And yeah, you shouldn't be taking drugs for fun, even though they are fun. But because also, like, yeah, there's also the thing like drugs by itself, like the word and the culture around it carries so much weight from obviously like all the bad things that had happened in history and still happen regarding, drug use or substance abuse. But I think even more specifically on the context of psychedelic, that's not even like possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was interesting. I find that Michael Pollan talks about this, about kind of the use of psychedelics for well people. Now, you could define well in a lot of different ways, but essentially, psychedelics for recreational use is what he's talking about. That it doesn't always have to be for people who have had difficulties in their life, particularly maybe mental health based issues and things of that nature, and kind of fighting against this notion that psychedelics are only for people who have had lots of trauma. I'm now, for me, speaking first, I have not had a lot of trauma in my life, and I've had incredibly vivid and memorable and impactful psychedelic experiences, as I've done both ceremony and recreational for it, and they both equally have been amazing for that. And I always think like people crave altered states of consciousness. And that altered state of consciousness, I believe, should not be reserved just for people who are dealing with a lot of deep issues. It's wonderful for that. But I don't believe that there should be a stigma for people just recreational use, because there is a lot you can get out of it just for the purpose of well-being and improving how you feel about things in the world.
Yeah, I completely agree. And like, if we are really honest, we already use stuff for altered state of consciousness in our day-to-day, like even coffee.
Exactly.
We just like, it's just how we categorize those things, right? Obviously in there, like when we are talking about recreational use, we are talking about responsible and safe recreational use, and not like the use of the substance to escape or to dissociate or anything like that, which also can happen. Like it happens a lot with people with ketamine, for example. But again, it's going back to this intention and why you are doing it, and who and where, and what is behind, your relationship with that drug and wanting to take that drug in that moment. And I really, for me, that makes the whole difference. And that's like also the basis of all the sort of like all the educational work that I try to do regarding drugs, is really trying to separate this idea and believe like, okay, drugs are bad, but more like, how do you use this specific thing, and your relationship with it that's what tells, like, if it is good or bad, but not necessarily what you are using, if that makes sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And I think to add to that is just that we've kind of made a blanket cover for drugs. We have, especially in the United States, we have created just an all for one. All these things are bad, pretty much, and there's no nuance to it. But I think your average person knows which substances are really life altering and like life damaging destruction. And then they know that there are certain substances it's like, oh, these are life enhancing, these teach me things. But for some reason, on the larger authority figures seem to not want to have that nuanced aspect at all. They do not want to just, like, oh, there's our differences. Like there's differences in people. It's like, duh. Like, like, it's like we don't want to have that conversation. It's very frustrating, actually.
Yeah. Well, like, we all know also why. And again, like, coming from my own personal perspectives and beliefs, but there is a reason behind all the media that was done to forbid psychedelics in the first place. And also there is a reason why, like, the people in power, or the people that create these laws and all of that, do not want people to have this type of experiences, right? And for me, personally, like, it's really clear of like how not helpful for the current system that we live in it is that we are more aware of things, we are more aware of ourselves, we are more connected with ourselves, and we are more connected with each other. Because if you think about it, and if I'm more connected, with people that are like me but have a different skin color, and we start to get together, suddenly we are much more powerful than the people who are actually in the power in the first place, right? And then it's
wild, right? When you really
like,
think about it, like a lot of the resistance is that people being awakened to who they actually are, and to be kinder, better, nicer, a more cohesive unit of humans is threatening to a lot of powerful people and entities. And you would think that would be what you want out of humans.
Well, ideally, but that's not what people want out of capitalism, right? Like, it's a whole system that was built in the first place to separate us from ourselves, to be really individualistic, to separate us from each other. So this is the only way the system works, and it's already not working that much anymore. I'm not gonna go so much in there, but like, because this is like a rabbit
You have
hole.
opinions. I see you have, Jessica, you have opinions. I see it.
So that's the thing. Like, I believe that, a lot of us in the psychedelic space, we have opinions, and we have really strong opinions.
Yes,
And
of course.
that's, I think that is also reason enough not to, make it easier for us.
Well, how
to
do you
accept
exist?
this.
Like, This is an interesting thing, I think. You talk about capitalism, but how does that play a part in psychedelics? Because there seems there is going to be a capitalistic movement within psychedelics related to the
Um,
substance, you know.
my gosh, there is already. I don't know if you have been reading so much the news about the what is going on in the psychedelic space lately, but like there were a few big collapses lately regarding Synthesis Institute and
I
Field
didn't
Trip
know
Health.
that.
Oh, you should check it out. Like, these are big organizations in this space, and they had quite a level of credibility. They appeared, Field Trip Health with a lot of clinics, ketamine clinics in the US. They even opened a psilocybin clinic here in the Netherlands. And Synthesis Institute was also like a very big educational institute working with a lot
Right.
of research and retreats here. And they're both bankrupt,
Hmm.
and they had to shut down like a lot of clinics, and Synthesis Institute is not running anymore like before. They had to close their trainings.
Whoa.
And the thing is, like, which is interesting, it doesn't surprise me so much. It didn't surprise me so much because these were companies that are still, they are in the psychedelic space, but they are behaving, or I don't know if that's the correct word, but they are placed in here, operating by the same capitalistic system and framework of like big investors. Let's roll out thing in a big scale with the best of the best. Let's put a lot of money in it. And when it comes, to the real thing and the real connection to why we are doing this in the first place, how can we make this accessible to more people? This was really, it's not there. So this is one way that, for example, I see this already playing out in the psychedelic space, is like this really is a mindset that is driven by let's make money out of this, let's make profit out of this, which I feel is not gonna work in this space, because like you cannot have that with treatments that are not lifelong treatments. These are not like pills, pharmaceuticals that you're going to be taking for the rest of your life, right? Like ideally, you're going to have a MDMA session or a psilocybin session a few times, and then you are good to go. You don't need that anymore, which is how it's supposed to be, actually, for everything. So I see that a lot of people are coming to the industry with this mindset, thinking, okay, this is going to be a money-making thing, which can be in certain ways, but I don't think that's, and that's also like my belief of like, it doesn't really reflect with what these tools are, and therefore it's not gonna work in that way.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I hadn't paid attention to that because I've just been talking to so many people in the space, and so I love talking and listening, and like getting this from you is like, oh, see, this is my information. I'm getting it. I'm like, wow, that's because I think there's an idea about the Synthesis Institute and all these things, and I had no clue that that was actually happening for that.
Me neither, until it happened. Like
Just out of nowhere, just kind of came out of nowhere. There was no
yes,
indication that this was happening.
I think probably from the inside, but not from the
Okay.
outside. I didn't know because they were still launching a bunch of events. They were still doing amazing,
Yeah.
educational stuff. So for me, it really came out as a surprise. And also like kind of like a shake up to pay attention of like, okay, let's see this. We need to do things different in this area. Yeah.
Feels like it's a time in the psychedelic space and movement that a lot of stuff is being tried, whether
Yes.
it's retreats, institutions, laws being passed to allow decriminalization of the substance, clinics in the US. I know like Oregon is leading the way with that. There's a lot of like the eyes are on Oregon with the, that whole deal. I just wonder how it's all going to shake out. That's kind of the great thing about the newness of something, even though it's not new, but it's new going this far.
Yeah.
in this
Yeah.
sense. Where do you see this? What's the best case scenario for this? And what's the worst
Ooh.
case scenario?
Oh my. Yeah. Like, okay, today, the way I
Today.
see it, um, my fear is that it happens very similar to what happened with the cannabis industry in the US.
Explain that, because I think a
Well,
lot of people are going to go, well, what happened to the cannabis industry?
yeah, like, so my knowledge in there is not as many as most people will have,
Okay.
as much as, okay, but I can explain some of the basics. It was an industry that they tried to place certain regulations in order that it could work, but is in the state there are different regulations for different states, and oftentimes what happened there was like that the people that have been working with this for a really long time, or the small entrepreneurs, they were not benefited from what it was implemented. And even there are certain places in there that people who run a cannabis business cannot even open a bank account. They need to run the whole thing with cash. And, it doesn't make it easier if you try to make something acceptable or legalize it or decriminalize it in one place, and then it's so much complication in order to make that business work, and it's so different from one place to the other. I fear as well, like, in the psychedelic space, it's something that it can go very similar.
Yeah.
But the problem that comes in there, that I think it makes it even worse, is the fact that these treatments are not cheap, and it's very hard to make that actually accessible. If you count like that, you need to have, okay, 2 psychotherapists in one room, and each charge, I don't know, for 150 per hour for a 6-hour session,
Snap.
plus everything that is before.
Wait a minute. That's wild. That's
Yeah,
crazy.
but you can see that already with the ketamine treatments that are available there. Like, most are not covered by insurance.
Right.
And when they are, there's still a big price that people need to pay in order to have access to the treatment. And like, only for so long, if you cannot afford that. Which if you look now in the news, there are a lot of news about like the complications on that, of people that started ketamine treatments and they cannot move forward with it, or they started the treatment and the clinics shut down like out of nowhere. So all of these things that are happening in this moment, because we are trying to, like, it's now going really mainstream and everybody knows about it, so there is the momentum and we want to make this work. But if we don't slow down and be careful about it, there is a risk of, like, messing it up completely, and make things, we don't want to have what we had a few years ago, in which all the research was rolling and all the things were going, and then they shut everything down and like we stopped for 30 years or so. But really not try to don't get into this fast pace that suddenly we need to legalize everything without knowing how's that going to look like. Is that even going to reach the people that actually need it, or is that only going to reach the people that can afford it? Do we have enough qualified people to even give these sessions? We don't. And even if you try to train like all psychologists, like you won't have, because it's not enough. Are you going to be working with people that are not psychologists but have been working on the underground for many, many years in a form of collaboration using their knowledge? Or is this going to be something that is really a structure and only the people who have this specific type of training or degree or, certificate can actually do that? So, and then, we don't even go back, to the people that have the traditional use. Like, what still, for me, like, where are they in these conversations? Is not really much in there. Like, so, worst case scenario, I think, like, things get really messed up and we cannot do anything anymore, and you just go back in there. Best case scenario, for me, I think it's really slowing down and be really mindful of, like, why do we want to bring this to the world?
Yeah.
At what pace? At what cost? For who? What for?
So there's a lot to chew on there. I mean, a
Mm,
lot. So I have several questions. One, how is this price being determined per session? I don't know if you know this or not, but I get curious about this. Is it essentially the labor cost? So the therapist is setting their price of how much they want to make. How much does the actual substance come into play? How much does that cost to get? Like, I'm just curious about, because and a lot of these things you look at it, okay, what's the competitive or comparative analysis? Well, this place is charging this place is charging that in this area. So we set the price based off of what's happening regionally or this
mm,
location. How do you
mm.
know that with something
Yeah.
that has not been done? So you're just basically I don't know this. I'm not accusing anybody, but is it just you're making up a very exorbitant price, or somebody who listens to this needs to educate me on this? How do you
Mm,
call, like clinicians, whatever, how do you set the price? Because I know how prices are set in most industries, and my industries is usually through a competitive analysis. You look at what other people are doing, what the region is, the cost of living, all this stuff. How is that done with this?
mhm. No, I would love if you would have somebody coming over with, a clinic background from
Yeah,
there that could also explain that more specifically to me. Because right now, the way it feels is because it has never done before, it kind of
yeah,
feels like, okay, let's estimate and kind of do it like that. And, here in the Netherlands, for example, there is not a base of how much you can charge and how much you
mm,
cannot charge for a session or for this type of service. So basically, each facilitator or organization have their own prices and the retreats as well.
yeah,
And it's really, I don't know, it's really defined by like what is included in this and what
mm,
kind of like high level experience is that, or what is the experience of the facilitator that is going to be there with you.
yeah,
Um, so here, as an example, there is not a proper solid reference point. But I think that's also very difficult when it comes to the fact that here, for example, only truffles, psilocybin truffles are legal. And yeah, if you pick there, is the case only with ketamine. Um, so it's really, people are really drawing a baseline of like, okay, maybe it can cost like this now, maybe in a few years from now, it can cost a little bit less. In the world that we live in, maybe it will cost a little bit more. you you know, and I think it gets more tricky in there if these things are only allowed to roll out, through the um how do you say, the medical system?
mm-hmm, yeah.
Because yeah, then I think it gets even more expensive, right? And
Oh,
like the access is even more limited. And there in the case with the insurances and all of that. So there's also a reason why people look for these things on the ground, right? There's also
right.
a reason why people rather pay, I don't know, a retreat in another country, or yeah, have an experience like that somewhere else. So it's a difficult question.
I mean, these are
I
the
would say.
questions that we should be having in this space.
Mhm,
I'm not at these conferences for psychedelics and all this stuff. So maybe they're having these conversations. I just want to talk to people who are in the
mm,
space and get as
mm,
much information one by one over time. But it brings me to another point, which is qualification to be a
mm,
guide or to
mm,
facilitate this. And obviously, there's a clinician aspect to it, and people are highly trained. But then obviously, you have other avenues of people who are just offering psychedelic integration coaches and stuff.
mm, mm.
Where do we need to land in this arena? Because it feels
Oh
like it's
my
just
God.
all over the place.
It is all over the place. And it's a difficult question, I find, because um, obviously, like somebody who has a degree in psychology has a lot of knowledge
Mhm.
in, how to help somebody who is going through a certain mental health issue and all of that. But that does not mean that this person has enough knowledge and is qualified enough to guide or do the
Right.
integration of a psychedelic experience if they don't have experience with that themselves or working with people who have had those experiences. So this is, right now we are seeing a bunch of different type of trainings like they are popping up. And I've recently actually finished my 1-year training with Psychedelics Today in psychedelic therapy and integration, which, by the way, it was amazing. I did not expect it to be that good. But I also felt like, 1 year gave me a good introduction on this. Is definitely not enough. From my perspective, the theoretical knowledge is great, but the experiential knowledge has no comparison to it.
Yes.
So in my head, if you can have a mentor, like back in the days when you need to learn a new craft, and I don't know, people that do sculptures, and you need to have a mentor and you learn directly from that person. Right. That's how I think it should be done to start with. So you learn from someone who has been doing this for many years, a guide who knows how to walk the terrain. And obviously to that, you can add a bunch of extra trainings that you think like can complement that, somatic therapy or even, theoretical knowledge about how the interaction of substances work, harm reduction training, all of that. I think it's all great. But obviously, it needs to come, I think it's a combination of mentorship, looking for extra sources of developing a knowledge about these compounds and how to hold space for other people. But as well, I think your own experiences, they can inform you a lot in how to do this work and how not to do this work.
Yes.
And all of that is you cannot measure these things. It's not something that you can just give a degree on it. And the thing about these experiences as well is that they are so unique to each person on the moment that they are in their lives, that is, I find it's very difficult. There is something that you can always, I know what will happen and I can be fully control of it. Doesn't really exist.
No way.
So getting the experiential knowledge from someone who knows and who has done this for a really long time, I think that's very enriching. And it really connects us with something we used to do back in the days, which is learning from our elders and, learning from the people who mastered this craft.
This is I love that, by the way. Mentorship, I'm always a big proponent of that. I just wonder if it's this feels very similar to the business I'm in, which is personal training and fitness, which is highly unregulated and has a bad reputation of poor organizational quality because there's no quality control, generally speaking. And everyone's out for themselves, the organizations, and no one's actually really willing to consolidate what we're doing for the greater good of the industry. And I feel like psychedelics should learn a lot from my industry because we are struggling tremendously because of that over time. And people don't take it as a legitimate business all the time because there's a lot of people in it who are just basically freelancing and are, for lack of a better word, just using as a hobby. They're not professional. It's kind of a joke to a lot of people. And there's a lot of lessons to be learned in that,
I fully agree with you. And I can definitely relate to that because even with my work, with doing sessions, there's a lot of people that are like, do I really need to pay all of that? Because you're just going to be sitting there. So I think with that, as well, like with the business of personal training and as well with, the psychedelic space, there's a lack of education for people to understand what is it, what is all that is in there. You need to have an understanding of how you should or should not move your body.
Exactly.
And what can be really damaging for your body if you do it wrong. You need to have, with psychedelics, you need to have a knowledge of people's mental health. There's a bunch of things that I don't think, like, from the outside, people don't take that very serious, or they don't really know that it's in there
Yeah.
in the first place. Yeah.
And it shouldn't be, to me, it shouldn't be all clinicians doing this work. I don't think that. And I think it's important. But if there's another subsection of people, or equal section of people performing ceremonies and stuff, I think it's good to define how you're able to get into this in a legitimate way where the consumer feels like they're getting a very good qualified person, whatever those qualifications are. I don't know. I just know from a lot of other industries that are not, let's put it this way, you just can't be a nurse. You just can't go up and say, oh, I'm a nurse. Like, I'm going to guide you through this. I'm going to help you when you're sick. Like, there is a pathway that's
Yeah.
recognized. You just, and everyone goes through it. It's not like it's, oh, well, it's freelancing, I'll just be a nurse because I feel like it. It's like, that's what's happening in psychedelics. I see some people just doing it because they feel like it, and they just had such a strong experience. They're fans of it. They're psychedelic
Yeah.
fans that badly want to be guides or whatever. And that's a dangerous path to go on. I
It's
believe that,
dangerous. It's like doing sport twice and you become a personal trainer, right?
That's what I'm saying. You have all this in the US with like all these people was like, let's say they did something like CrossFit or whatever, and they loved it. And then they became a CrossFit gym owner with zero business experience, zero educational background, but now they own a gym. I'm not making this about CrossFit. I'm just saying this just an example. It could be anything for that. Just because you're a fan of something doesn't mean that you're meant to be a guide in that space, a leader in that space. But if you want to enter that space, you should figure out what's the most appropriate way for me to be knowledgeable in that. And if the problem is, if the larger entity is giving you no guidance on how that is, then you just take it into your own hands,
Yeah. The thing there, like, which I think it should be helpful to do, but obviously when people are entering this space with, that kind of approach, they're not doing that. But some certain level of self-inquiry, and ask, like,
Yeah.
why do I want to work with this in the first place? Is it like to help other people, or is it to feed my ego? Is there some sort of ego inflation in there? Or like, suddenly, yeah, I had this massive ayahuasca experience and now I'm a shaman or whatever, and I'm here, to heal others. And that happens a lot, and also here. And yeah, like you said, it's extremely dangerous because people, when they come into the States, they are extremely vulnerable.
Yeah.
And if a facilitator cannot hold them in this vulnerability, that can be re-traumatizing for a lot of people. And the reality is as well, like, a lot of people that come to take psychedelics, they do have a history of trauma, or they are taking it for, exactly to try to work on that. So I think, like, in that sense, like, some sort of check-in with yourself and, like, really trying to see what is the reason behind. And if it is coming from an ego place, then it's already not, like, a good reason.
Yeah. But it's interesting. You're asking people to do something they often don't do ever for themselves, which is evaluate themselves. Like, honestly. And like, am I an egomaniac? Am I really doing this because I want to feed my own ego? Like, I don't know a lot of people that actually talk to themselves like that. I think they're on the wheel all the time, and it's like to slow down and say, am I doing this for a really positive purpose, or am I just doing this to escape my life type of thing? That's like another deeper aspect of being a human that, one, I think psychedelics does help open that you start thinking about yourself differently.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
that's a very difficult thing to get humans to do. It really is.
Yeah, it definitely is. And the funny thing is, or maybe not so funny, but the interesting thing is with a lot of people, when they start taking psychedelics, it kind of happens the opposite, right? Like, because at the end of the day, these are just non-specific amplifiers.
Yes.
And if you are not this kind of person before, up until that you change that, you might be just repeating the same things and the same beliefs.
Yes.
And this is also why I think, like, for certain people, it happens, this ego inflation, and they get more disconnected from themselves and more attached to their narratives about the world. So that's also like why I also think it's important to talk. There is a dark side to psychedelics. It's not everything, great and amazing and it's for everybody, because it's clearly not.
Yeah. And that dark
Yeah.
side's not talked about enough. I'm actually working on a project related to that.
I saw.
Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
man. I think
Mhm.
it's gonna be gigantic.
Uh-huh.
I really do, because it's like I like to go to places that people are not trying to talk. It's not a fairy tale land. It's
No,
like
yeah.
there are people that have had incredibly terrible experiences with psychedelics. Right?
Yes.
Nothing is all good all the time. Like that's just
No.
not possible.
No,
Like,
it's
but we
not.
treat it like that with psychedelic. A lot of people treat psychedelics like that. It's this wonder thing, like it would just cure everything. It's not
Yeah.
true.
Yeah, I feel like this is also very much connected with so psychedelics are very much in the spiritual community right now. And the spiritual community, sometimes it can be like a lot of like, we are all one, everything is
Yeah.
good, and positive psychology and all those stuff
Yeah.
that are just like really toxic, and they really don't take into consideration what is the reality of different people from different
Yes.
classes and different cultures and all of that.
Right.
And this also affects how people view or have psychedelic experiences themselves. And I don't think it's all. We have in history many cases of people that have used psychedelics in a wrong way.
Yeah.
You saw like with that CIA project, but also like people that use that for cults and to really take advantage of vulnerable people, because
Yeah.
again, there's a lot of vulnerable people in this space. And the reality of our world is, if there are vulnerable people, there will be people there who will want to take advantage of those people.
For sure.
It's ugly, but it's also part of human nature, I find. So this is also why I feel like we need, like you said, exactly, we need to have these conversations. We should not pretend that these things don't happen and they don't exist, because when we do that, we are automatically invalidating the stories of people
Yes.
who, suffered from something like this happening. I think, like, for example, even talking about bad trips, or talking more about sexual abuse in ayahuasca ceremonies, these are things that make people really uncomfortable to talk about. Nobody wants to talk about that, because it brings
Right.
discomfort on your own self, right? It makes you check in with yourself. What you like with your own,
Exactly.
you know,
People
what
don't
is
want to check in with themselves. That's the
again?
problem. They need, but you
Yeah.
have to, if you want to grow, you have to check in,
Mm-hmm.
negative and positive. This is a large human nature, human condition conversation, is that there is
Yes.
both good and bad. And in this psychedelic space, there will totally be disgusting gurus, people who are going to
Mm-hmm.
pray. They're doing it right now. There are definitely people
Mm-hmm.
doing that as we speak, who are like, this is another opportunity to take advantage of
Mm-hmm.
very vulnerable people. Even if something appears wonderful and there's a lot of wonderful things to it, there are going to be people in the space who are going to try to hurt people and do bad things. And my
Yeah.
thing is like, that's why you really have to have it buttoned up, because
Mm-hmm.
right now it's easy for people to get in to do really weird stuff because there's no
Mm-hmm.
regulation. In a sense, the regulation is, oh, it's illegal, but that doesn't stop anyone from doing anything ever.
No.
It
No.
does
Yeah.
not. you know
Yeah. Yeah, but it gets even more complicated than that. Like, when we're talking about regulation, how are we actually going to regulate these things?
that's the hard
Like,
that's
on
the
the
thing we
world.
have to like really think about. Like we have to
Mhm.
actually really take our time and really
Mhm.
think about this. Like if you
Mhm.
don't want it to be a more capitalistic thing, if you want it to be a more capitalistic thing, do you want it to be a more indigenous based thing? The cost structure, this is going to take a lot of work and a lot of very patient, wonderfully focused people. to do
Oh,
it.
yes,
All right. And
100%.
this hard work to do stuff
Mm.
like this, you know?
It's hard work, and I think it should be done again in smaller scales, like really having, smaller communities that are in charge
Yeah.
of regulating. I don't know if you pick here in Amsterdam, there's one that is in charge of Amsterdam, people who are doing this work here. Because I also find like having, I don't know, an institution or something like MAPS to do the, control, try to,
Right.
make sure everything is good.
Oversight, right? Like,
It's
yeah,
so crazy. Like, that's impossible.
it's
So
impossible. Yeah.
that's where I think like really this aspect again of like going back to the small scale, going back to smaller communities, knowing the people, knowing each other, knowing your mentors, who you're working with, and trying to build that from that space. I think then things can work in a very good way, and holding people accountable in that way is much easier as well.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to see kind of a psychedelic mentor network that was on some, organized in a way that people felt like, well, this is a great place to go to find a guide, people who are vetted, those things. Again, it's just a lot of work. Like, listen, there are a lot of wonderful people out there doing incredible work. But I'm not in this space, but I've talked to so many people in the space. Be very careful. You're literally becoming the fitness industry. You got to be very careful about this. We are struggling tremendously. Don't let anybody tell you we're not. We are, and you're headed down the same pathway. You better start having these conversations right now and
Oh my
uniting,
God.
because you will be a hobbyist. You'll just get a lot of hobbyists in it, or people who are fans, and it's going to water down what you're doing.
Oh yeah, that
It just is.
compromised the whole movement.
Yeah, it just
Yeah.
will, and you already have a big stigma issue, is that you still have people who believe these are substances that people do who are not responsible, legitimate people in society. There's a lot of people who still think that way about it. So you're trying to overcome this stigma and make it more legitimate. What you do now will set the course of where this industry goes.
Yes, 100%. And I go back in there again, education. I don't see any other way that we can do this work if we don't include education in our work. And that's what you do already with the podcast as well. We are educating people.
That's right.
You are bringing the stories of different people, which is, for me, it's a great way of educating people that normalize these conversations, normalize having these conversations and the different perspectives that are in there, so that we are more aware of what is actually happening, that we have our own opinions and not just like believe on what somebody says, it's how you should do it or not. So education should be in the pillar of all of this. And slowly with that and building that educational foundation, we can think about having, a space that is actually healthy and helpful. Yeah.
I have to tell you, this is one of the best conversations I've ever had about psychedelics.
You
The
like
best.
it?
Because it just felt like it was full of so many great talking points. And
I can't, like
that,
you, I can talk so much.
I mean, I could go on and on about this stuff. Like I said, I'm not a facilitator in the space. I'm not working in the industry. I'm just, in some ways, just a very outside journalist in some way for this storyteller for people in the space. But I see where it's headed. And I want to be a part of helping people get the stories out, both good and bad, because it's not all rainbows and fairy tales. But there is a dark side to it. But there's so much good. But we just got to be careful. As an outsider, I'm looking on the inside. I'm like, ooh, I see where this is headed. Like, you don't want this. So thank you for being a part of this discussion and to get it out to a lot of people.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, next time we make it longer, because
I think
we
we
can
got to
talk for
talk
hours, I
again,
see.
Jessika. There's something special here. Like, you are very grounded in how you look into this. Seriously, one of the best conversations I've ever had about psychedelics, for sure.
Thank you. I feel like it's my Brazilian woman, I have strong opinions about certain things as well. So
Well, you kept that, you know what? You kind of kept that bubbling. It was like right there. You're like,
like
oh, I got some things to say, but I'm not going to go too far into it, you know?
yeah, this is the thing always with me and recording podcasts and all of that is like I said, these are my personal beliefs and this is my opinion today. If like you present me facts and a lot of things change on the industry, this might change. So that's always why I'm like, okay, this is how much I want to say
Yeah,
and like, yeah, but I also want to leave it open, like for someone who is listening and doesn't agree with something, yeah, come
most
talk to me and
definitely.
like, yeah, explain something, yeah, that gives me more, yeah.
Well, tell all the folks who are going to be listening to this how they can connect with you, websites, resources, all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, basically, you can find my work through my private business website, which is jessicalagarde.com. And that's my business focus on psychedelics for women. Or they can find, yeah, most of my educational work on the platform womenonpsychedelics.org, which is also a storytelling platform, yeah, for women in this
Wonderful.
space.
That's awesome. Jessika, thank you so much for your time. I'm grateful we had the conversation and we definitely have to speak again for sure.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was great.
Awesome. All right, until next time.
Till next time.